Today, I'd like to continue our journey in the book of Deuteronomy, the famous farewell discourse of Moses. We've been looking at chapter 21 of the book of Deuteronomy, and there's a fascinating passage towards the end of chapter 21 that talks about a person who is condemned to death. They're hanging on a tree, and really that person then becomes an example to others. It's kind of an intimidation factor that really happens. And there's an interesting phrase that the author uses. It says, God's curse rests on the person who hangs on a tree. It's very interesting when you unpack that a little bit, that God's curse should rest on this person. And I guess their thinking is, well, this person has been condemned to death. They've obviously done something that is harmful to the community in some way. But in the tradition that we've evolved since then, we say, well, there are possibilities for making a mistake. And perhaps somebody who is innocent is going to be condemned in that way. So our ability to judge exactly and to determine if something actually happened when this person is being accused, it's thrown in doubt a little bit. In the times that are being referred to here, you have a smaller community. People knew each other in a more intimate way. When you have a larger community and there's a lot of people that are anonymous that you don't know, and there's comings and goings, it can be more difficult to determine guilt or innocence. So that's certainly a factor that you have to keep in mind. But it's interesting when you look at it from a Christian perspective that Jesus died on a tree. And here in Deuteronomy it's saying God's curse rests on a person who hangs on a tree. And certainly it shows the willingness of Jesus to take on that curse for us. For certainly dying on a tree, dying by crucifixion was considered a humiliating way to die. It was considered that you were a horrible person. If you were hanging on a tree, you must have done a terrible crime. Jesus, as we know, doing no crime, being innocent, really, being more of a threat to the political powers of the time. And those who were the religious leaders wanted to make sure that he was eliminated, and so they chose this avenue to make sure that Jesus and his ministry did not continue in that way. But it's interesting that Jesus has that willingness to enter into this curse situation that the book of Deuteronomy talks about. And some writers would say, is this in a way a prefigurement in Deuteronomy of what Jesus would take on to show the depth of his love? That most people would refrain from this type of dealing with these types of curses and these types of situations, and would try to stay on the straight and narrow and avoid it. And Jesus certainly had the opportunity to do that, to flee Jerusalem and not to be as present in the religious center, the religious capital for the people at the time. But he chose more the idea that I've come to share this message, to share it with everyone, and was faithful to proclaiming the message, did not step back from it, but showed great courage and willingness to engage with the authorities of his time. So a very interesting passage there in Deuteronomy. In chapter 21, then it goes on to talk about that it is important not to defile the land. And the idea of the defiling of the land would be by the spilling of blood on the land would defile it. So that's why the tradition would be against killing and murder and all of that because it would involve the spilling of the blood, and the land is sacred to God, and the spilling of the blood defiles the land, makes the land kind of cursed, makes the land showing that there is no respect and reverence for the land. This land is special. It's given to the people by God. So they embrace the land in that way, in that special way. As we continue on into chapter 22, it talks about the element of charity that is necessary. It says that it's important to help your neighbor with his lost animals and his property. Now, if you don't know to whom the animal or the property belongs, basically what you should do is you should keep it at your own home until someone comes to claim it. So maybe this property, this animal has wandered onto your land, or this property has been left on your land, and you see it, and you don't know, it's not recognizable, who does this belong to? Of course, in the tradition of our own West, we have the branding of the animals. And that was to make sure that we knew to whom that animal belonged, especially in the situation of mixed herds. You don't seem to have this here. And so there can be some confusion as to who uh, is the person who you should return this animal or this piece of property to. And so what you do, and it's very prudent to do this, is you hold it in your home, and then if somebody comes looking for it, somebody comes claiming it, then you can give it back to them, and you've preserved it for them, you've helped them. So this, again, would be another example of charity, of love for neighbor, of concern for neighbor. Another aspect in chapter 22 is the aspect, and we find it kind of shocking when we see it, because we don't think of it. Cross-dressing is condemned. So a man dressing as a woman dressing as a man, that is condemned. And there are some examples of it in the Bible, even though it is condemned, when it's actually used in a positive way. When a woman would dress as a man would dress as a woman, as part of God's plan. But in general, the cross-dressing is condemned, which is very interesting because anytime something is condemned in the scriptures like this, there is a sense of it being an issue. Why would something be condemned if it never happened? And we don't think of cross-dressing as going back this far in these times. But I guess it did happen on occasion, and so it was condemned as something that was not good. And again, you can see the reason for it being condemned. You have it in the community, and it could lead to confusion among people, and so the idea is no cross-dressing. Of course, in our own time, we have these different shows that people have, and it's a different experience entirely than what the scripture is referring to here. It's referring more to the problem of deception and sowing confusion among people, rather than as obviously a form of entertainment or a humorous type of situation. Another aspect in chapter 22, you should respect birds and their young. The mother bird should be set free if captured, but you can take the brood. And the idea of the mother bird set free is, again, she's going to reproduce, and so she should be set free. But the brood, you can take them and preserve them and help them. But basically, try to respect life is what this would come down to. And I think we find this is a very consistent message in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the Torah, the importance of respecting human life, but also, of course, the importance of respecting animal life, which we bring out in our own time through protecting those species that are endangered. And Pope Francis very much speaks about this in Laudato Si, the idea of preserving all of these different species that God has given to us.